Hi, I'm Tony Northrup, and thanks for watching my Photoshop video training series. Today I'm going to show you how to use adjustment layers. They're a really quick and easy and reversible way to make common adjustments to your photos, such as changing the brightness of the colors or the brightness of the image, making them more contrasty. All those kinds of things you might do in Lightroom, you can also do in Photoshop. So let's dig right into it. I have a picture of a cardinal here, and you can see it could actually use a little help. Even just glancing at the histogram, I can see there's no blacks in here and there's no whites. You can see everything's just in the middle, but it doesn't touch the edges. And that's a good sign that the picture's washed out, even without looking at the picture. But as I look at the picture, I can see it's washed out. And the reason it's washed out is, well, it's a picture of the cardinal in snow, and I took it through glass, and the glass reflects a little bit of the light. And also, the air was thick with humidity because of the snow just washing everything out. But there's a lot we can do for that. Now, one way that, the old way to do it would be to go to Image, Adjustments, and Levels. And this would bring up the Levels dialog box. And then you could drag the blacks up, drag the whites down, and maybe adjust this middle here, and bam, you've got yourself a much more contrasty image. But then if I save the image and open it next week, there's no way to go back. Because unlike Lightroom, which in Lightroom, all changes are reversible. Once you get into Photoshop and you save the file, those changes are not reversed. The only way to be able to undo changes is to add new layers. And when you use the Image Layers tool, you just can't do that. So I'm just going to go back in time a little bit and undo that. Now let's talk about how to add adjustment layers. So over here in this panel, we see the adjustments here. And you can always go to Window and Adjustments if that doesn't appear. I see a check mark there, so I know I can see it. You can see we have all these different adjustment layers that I can add. Brightness, contrast, levels, curves, exposure, vibrance. We'll go through each one. The first one, and what this one really needs, is brightness contrast. So I'll click that, and it brings up this handy tool. So, I'm going to just kind of adjust these to make my picture pretty. I could use a lot of contrast here, and it's going to really improve the histogram. You can see it's changing the histogram live. That helps me kind of know exactly where I should be. So I could pull the brightness down a little bit. As a photographer, I know the most important part of this picture is the eye of the bird. So that's really where I'm looking. If the snow behind it is super bright or even blown out, that's okay. I just got to get that eye perfect. So that's really what I'm looking at. Okay, so that's actually looking pretty good. I'll click this to just hide that panel away. Now, for some reason, the way my screen is currently laid out, I can't see the layers. If I click Layers, it hides the Adjustments panel. I'm just going to show you a trick for rearranging these panels, because I want to see both the Adjustments panel and the Layers panel at the same time. But I've made the fonts bigger to make it easier for you to see on the screen, and that means I don't have room to fit everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the Adjustments tab here and just drag it up to a different panel. And now I can click Layers here and keep both the adjustments and the layers open. And as I do that, you can see that when I added the adjustment layer here, it literally added another layer. And layers are so great to work with because you can save the file as a file type that saves layers, like a TIFF file. I'll save it now. And those layers will be preserved. So as I save it, the PSD file here is just fine. PSDs and TIFF files save layers. I can reopen it and I will see this brightness contrast layer again. And if I want to undo that, I just hide it. You can see on the layers here, there's a little eye, and that means you can see that particular layer. When you click the eye and hide the layer, it's completely hidden, but it doesn't go away. You can always make it reappear. So brightness contrast, that's an important layer that you might want to add. I'm going to hide that one, and we can go to the levels adjustment. And levels they do very similar things to the brightness contrast, but in a more complex way. Whereas brightness contrast is just really intuitive. You just crank up the brightness to make it brighter, crank it down, crank the contrast up. We kind of inherently know what that means. Levels are a little more complex. And if you use a histogram on your camera, then you're going to be perfectly familiar because it just shows you the histogram. The higher up the histogram is at any particular point, the more of that specific brightness pixel exists in your picture. So there's 255 gradients. 256 really, because 2 to the 8th power is 256, and there's 8 bits. It's some complex math, but what you need to know is, from looking at the histogram, I can see there's nothing in the blacks here. So I'm going to redefine total black as actually being, let's say, the 28th value of gray. So if the number 0 is complete black, 255 is complete white, then 28 is dark gray. And I'm going to change dark gray to completely black by pulling up that black slider. I'm going to do the same thing with total white here. 255, there's nothing that's 255. There's nothing that's complete white. So I'm going to make stuff that was gray, but almost white, completely white, by just dragging this down. So now anything that had a brightness of 233, say 222, now is going to be 255. It's taking the histogram and just spreading it out for me. And the middle slider here defines middle gray. So you can see I can make almost the entire image brighter, or almost the entire image darker, by pulling that middle slider. And middle gray in this situation is going to be the halfway point between 0 and 255, so about 122, 123. So where do you want that middle point to be? And you know, I'm kind of trying to give you some of the background math behind it, but all you really need to know is slide these around until stuff looks good. It's a matter of taste. There's not a right science to it. But again, as a photographer, I want the eye here to look as good as I can possibly do it. You can see the level slider also has output levels here. And I've been saying outputs between 0 and 255. If you wanted the picture to be high key, if you only wanted the values from 128 to 255 to be displayed, you'd pull that slider up. If you wanted it to be low key, just going from 0 to 128, you'd pull the white slider down. You could also have it just be shades of gray here, where there's no white and no perfect black. It's only using these mid-ranges here. You almost never do that. It just doesn't look that good. But I wanted you to know where those were, because there are special occasions where you would use those. Now, there are some presets here. I don't particularly find those useful, but I think they're all pretty well named. I just wanted to show you where those are. So we'll hide that away. Now we have two different types of adjustment layers, the levels and the brightness contrast. And I could turn them both on and they would magnify each other. But you can see as I switch between them here to here, I accomplish basically the same results with the levels layer and with the brightness contrast layer, because again, those two basically do the same thing in different ways. So let's turn both those off and we'll look at yet another way to accomplish exactly the same thing, and that's the curves adjustment layer. So as I open this up, once again we see the histogram. But now instead of simply adjusting the black and white point, I can adjust it more perfectly. So it's doing exactly the same thing, and then I'm just redefining what white and black are. So rather than adjusting the blacks with a slider here, I'm just going to move that line over to tell it what I want black to be. So the X and Y axis of this grid here are mapping your input and output values. So this is your input values going horizontally here, and my output value. So here, my input value is 27, my output is going to be 0. That's what it's telling me there. And if I click here in the middle, you can see I'm telling it my input value of 138. Instead, make that a 130 when you show it to me and when you render it and such. So by dragging in the blacks and whites, I'm accomplishing exactly the same thing that we did with the brightness and the levels adjustment. And to adjust that midtone, again, I can do this and make everything almost black, or do this and make it more high key. And again, it's just to taste. It doesn't have to be exact. Now, there's an auto button here, which you can see it put a little curve in. I'm going to Control Z and undo that, just so I can show you that the curve can sometimes be useful. This means it's going to provide you more detail in the shadows, more detail in the highlights, less detail in the midtones, or vice versa, depending on how you do it. You can adjust the curves up to just get more contrast where you need it, and less contrast where you don't. You can use this to kind of achieve HDR techniques, though HDR software usually does a better job of it. One thing I want you to avoid is pulling this up too much, because you can see when the curve actually gets inverted like that, stuff gets real weird. It just ends up getting pretty crazy. So maybe you want to do that for a special effect. It's fun, but you know, Not something you want to use every day. Go crazy with the curves. Let's look at the exposure adjustment layer. This, again, pretty obvious. The exposure, this is a raw file I'm working with here, so I might actually be able to recover some extra detail from it. You can just slide it up or down to adjust the exposure. If you are working with a raw file, I suggest you work instead with the raw import dialog box, or better yet, if you're using Lightroom, do adjustments to the exposure there before you bring it into Photoshop. There is a tool here, but it won't necessarily be using all the data from the raw file. The offset will, well, I would say this is something you should be doing with the other sliders instead. The offset will just shift the exposure even further. I'm going to double click these to reset them. There are droppers down here that will tell Photoshop what you want the black point to be. So you could click that and then click what you thought should be the darkest point in the picture. I'll click his mask up here, and it made that black. I could click this one and tell it what the whitest point in the picture should be. You know, make some of the snow completely white. And of course the midtones here. If this is about middle gray, I could pick that. Well, that obviously was too dark. The exposure adjustment layer, kind of outdated, especially now that most of us will be working with raw files and using a process that involves Lightroom 2. I would instead do that kind of work there. Vibrance. Vibrance is not quite the same as saturation, and you can see the vibrance adjustment layer gives you separate options for each. So vibrance is just a smarter way to do it. The difference is that when you crank it up all the way with saturation, it's more likely to blow out some colors. So this is a bright bird, and you can see as I crank the saturation up to 100, he looks terrible because all the values in that red became full 255, completely as red as you could possibly get. When I use the vibrance slider, it's going to be much more gentle. Vibrance, instead of cranking everything up to the maximum, it will retain some of that detail in the parts that should be as saturated as possible. So it doesn't overdo it as easily. So again, saturation, yuck. Vibrance, much more graceful. Now, these are all layers, which means you can adjust the layer masks and apply any of these effects selectively to your picture. So let's do this. Let's, dare I say it, try spot color. I'm going to just drag the saturation slider down here. So now we have a desaturated black and white picture. And, you know, just for fun, let's turn these levels on so it looks a little nicer. Now, this layer mask here, you can see it's completely white. And any part of the layer mask that's white means you will see the layer in effect for that part of the picture. If I make that layer mask completely black, I'll pull out my bucket tool here. My foreground color is set to black, and I have the layer mask selected. I'll click in there, and you can see the layer mask itself is now black. And the effect is that that layer is completely turned off. That's how masks work, just a brief overview. Any place I paint white in here will now make that layer appear. So I'm going to use the brush tool, and I have the foreground color set to white, and I have the mask selected. So now any place that I paint is going to make that layer mask appear. I need to set my opacity up to 100. So now the effect of that layer mask will appear anywhere I paint, and you can see the color in the background is just disappearing. There's some red tones in this wood here. As I paint the layer mask, you can see they become black and white, and you can see the white appears in the layer mask over here. So I could do this a little more gracefully with a selection tool, but I'm just kind of roughing it in. And I'll switch between painting white and painting black and just undo some of the spillage that I had painting onto my poor bird here. And so this is a quick way to commit the crime of spot color. If for some reason you wanted to hurt my feelings and do that to me, you could do that. Anyway, one of the best things about using adjustment layers is that you do have this power of using masks in Photoshop. That's more powerful than making adjustments in Lightroom. So you can use masks kind of in Lightroom, but I find the tools to be a little bit clumsy. They're definitely more powerful in Photoshop. So something like this is better. Let's turn off that awfulness and check out the hue saturation adjustment layer. I'll click that in, and it's going to look familiar because, again, we have the saturation slider, and you can see, again, the saturation slider makes everything ugly. It's not nearly as graceful as the vibrance slider. So for that reason, I'm going to push you to use the vibrance slider instead of the saturation or the hue saturation. But there are still times when you will use hue saturation, specifically to change the color of things. So what will happen as I adjust the hue here is reds are going to become greens and blues are going to become reds, just depending on where you slide it. And kind of a cool effect with the bird. Now, when you have master selected, all the colors in the image are going to be affected by it. If I were to select reds, then I'd be able to adjust just basically the red tones in the picture. And this picture doesn't have much besides red tones. So let's reset that, and instead, well, I'll go up to master here and change that back. Now, if I were to adjust the greens, we probably won't see many greens in the picture. No, you don't really see much in there. Anyway, you can use this as a quick way to adjust all of your reds into the blues, but it's not very precise because when you say you're going to adjust the reds down, you see the red bird, but you probably didn't realize that the wood here also had red tones in it. So now we have a purple bird. So if I wanted to take the layer mask that I made previously from the vibrance layer, I can just grab it and drag it up, and it will prompt me to replace the layer mask. And so now you can see, well, actually that layer mask was the exact opposite of what I wanted. I wanted to change just the color of the bird, and because the bird here is black, it changed everything else. But what I can do is select that layer mask, and then go up to Image, Adjustments, and Invert. And that will flip the layer mask around. So now the bird itself is colorized, but the background is not. Just refining my brush there a little bit. So if you ever want to go back and adjust a layer again, just double click this icon here and the panel will automatically pop back out for you. So with that layer mask in effect, I can change the red tones of the bird to something else, and then submit it to the Audubon Foundation as a new species that I discovered and become rich and famous. There you go. So easy. Now let's go on to the color balance layer here, and this is great when you have pictures that just have a weird color to them, but again, this is something that I like to do in Lightroom. Lightroom has really good white balancing tools that I actually like better than Photoshop, but if you really want to, the Photoshop color balance tool is more powerful. It's not just white balance. Instead, you could adjust specific CM, Y, and RGB values here in separate channels, and I find this generally completely unnecessary. You could also adjust the shadows, highlights, and mid-tones separately. So this can be really useful for a technique called split toning, where you adjust the color balance of the shadows and highlights separately. And in the real world, split toning occurs, especially at times like sunset and sunrise during the golden hour, because during those times the sun itself will be very warm, but places the sun isn't directly hitting, like the shadows, will be filled with light that's reflected off the air. And so the warm sun is contrasting with the coolness in the shadows. And sometimes you might try to simulate that by, for example, grabbing the highlights here and making them a little bit warmer, and then grabbing the shadows and making them a little bit cooler. So if I pull up you can see that looks different. And if I just turn off that layer, this is the before and this is the after. So that's kind of a cool effect of split toning. And it's almost an Instagram-y feel. And that's one way that you can simulate it. The color balance tool in the right hands can be a really powerful tool. You can use it just to fix the white balance, but it can do a lot more than that. Let's move on to the black and white. Now, of course, as soon as you apply this layer, everything turns black and white. And if you've ever done actual film black and white photography, you might remember that you used to put on a yellow filter, or sometimes a red filter or an orange filter. these filters would change the balance of light coming into your camera. And if you put on a yellow filter and then took a color photo, everything would look kind of yellow. But the effect on black and white is that you're changing how your film would receive different frequencies of light. Maybe you're making the blues pop a little bit more. Sometimes this would actually make the film look more natural. It might make skin tones look more natural because you'd get to know a specific roll of film, a specific type of film, like some type of Fuji film, and you would know that you had to make the reds pop a little more because it didn't look right. Anyway, you can achieve that effect in post when you take a color picture and convert it to black and white. And Lightroom lets you do this, but Photoshop does too. And this can make such a big difference in your black and white photos. So for example here, the bird is mostly red, so just by adjusting the red slider, I can pretty much adjust the look of the bird to get more optimal contrast and make it look just more natural to my eye. You can see there are lots of yellow tones in here. And you know, for the most part, this is more art than science. I'm just going to drag these up and down and kind of get the look that I want. Because there's no right or wrong answer here, it's just art. So there we go. Obviously, as I turn this off, it changes the picture dramatically because it goes from being black and white to color. Now let's create a new photo filter. Those photos I was just talking about, photographers used to use them all the time in the pre-digital era because it was just more difficult to edit your photos when you were shooting film. So you'd put a warming filter on if you wanted to simulate sunset. So there we have a warming filter, and you can see it just made everything a little bit warmer. If you were shooting indoors under incandescent lights, you'd probably put a cooling filter on to make in fact, it would be an LBB filter, just to make the color look a little more natural. So you can see the effects of those exact filters, and they still use the same abbreviations that we would use on our cameras in the old school film days. So enjoy being able to apply those filters. It's something nice to simply play with. And it's generally just used for color correction, but you could technically use this for white balance correction, just like you used to in the old days. But again, I would rather do that with the raw file in Lightroom. But that's how you could add photo filters here. Now let's talk about the channel mixer adjustment layer. And this isn't something you're going to use a lot. All pictures consist of red, blue, and green channels, mostly all pictures. And red and blue make purple, you might know this. Red, blue, and green, if you add them all together, they make white. Well, the way Photoshop processes your picture, each of these channels is separate. And in fact, we could redirect all the red output to green output. So let's try that now, just for the sake of example. Up here at the top, we're editing the output channel. So you can see you can select red, blue, or green. And it's saying this is the inputs down here. 100% of the green input output to the green channel. So let's not send the green towards the green channel. You can see that immediately takes all the green out of the picture. Instead, let's send 100% of the red towards the green channel. Now, if I go into the red channel, I could say, don't send any red towards the red channel. Instead, let's send the green towards the red channel. So what I've done now is I've swapped red and green. And I made this unnatural monstrosity that you see here. We can turn it on and off. That's how it works. I have no practical use for this. I'm just kind of undoing it now by double-clicking these labels. There are some presets here which can simulate different effects. For example, taking a black and white picture with a green filter. This will pretty exactly simulate it. You can try to simulate infrared here by dropping the red from the spectrum. That's the channel mixer. I don't find it that useful. Let's check out the color lookup adjustment brush. And this is a more complex way of mapping input and output colors. And I can't say that I've ever used it in photography. It's something you use a lot in videography. You are welcome to play with these. You can see there are some different looks in here. These 3D LUT files, LUT files, will apply different effects to your computer. And you probably will not have these because this computer also has video editing software. But they can be used to create pretty cool effects. If you like these types of effects, if you find them useful, what you can do is search the web for 3D LUT files. There are lots out there that are freely available, and some you might have to pay for, but they're a cool way to very easily simulate a film look. So some of these are looks that we frequently use in our videos just because I like the look of it. So you can see kind of the before and after. It just flattens it a little bit, adjusts the color a little bit. And this does not give you the ability to adjust the LUTs. It's not really what it's for. It's just merely for applying basically a preset. It's not unlike a Lightroom preset. So we'll turn that off. It's a cool thing to play with. And check out the invert panel, and sure enough, it inverts it. Now, I actually did this trick earlier using a layer mask. I inverted the layer mask using the image adjustments invert option here, and that it does exactly that. It takes everything that's white and makes it black, and it basically makes it look like a film negative. That's all there is to it. It is literally a film negative. If you were to scan in a film negative, you could apply that invert and it would look natural to you. Posterize is a special effect. Normally we would do this with some sort of filter from the filter menu up here. It's going to reduce the number of colors that it's outputting and group smaller gradients into bigger gradients. So what you'll see is instead of nice smooth gradients like this, you're going to see, you know, large chunks, jumps between different shades of gray. And as you slide it down, well, that's what it does. There are practical reasons to use it, but in practice, it's really just a special effect. So let's move on to the threshold slider. And what the threshold slider is going to do is basically turn our picture into literally black and white. And anything below this marker here is going to become black, and anything above the marker is going to become white. So I can, you see, if I drag it down to the bottom, only stuff that's marked as 1, the very darkest value, is going to be black. Everything else is going to be white. And there are some true whites in this picture. So if I drag it all the way to the right, almost everything is black except for stuff that is pure white. That's what it does. Again, one of those that you probably won't use a lot. So let's move on to selective color, which is another word for spot color, which, you know, isn't necessarily our favorite technique, but this is a tool that you can find kind of useful. So first, you can select the color up here, and this is the color that you're going to be modifying. This picture has a lot of red in it. So we'll start by modifying the reds, and you can see now working with just the reds, I can adjust the color balance of that. So I could pull them towards yellow and magenta and kind of adjust it. I could also adjust the amount of blacks in it by cranking it up to lower the brightness, or bring it to the left to brighten it up. You can do this with any particular channel in it. There aren't a lot of blues in this picture, so we won't see much difference here. There are some greens in here. So, well, there's not a lot of greens, it turns out. Anyway, it's just another way to selectively adjust a single color in the picture. And while that can be useful, I would generally prefer to use masking. You'll generally get more natural effects if you use masking and then make the adjustments to a specific mask. So let's close that and hide that away, and go to the very last adjustment layer, which is the gradient map. The gradient map is going to map your entire picture to a set of different colors. And you can see this happened to be a color set that I worked with previously, so I had it saved. But it's taking it from this kind of dark violet to pure white. So anything that was black before is now being mapped to the colors you see over here on the left. Anything that's pure white is being mapped over here. We could reverse it, and basically that would be exactly like applying the gradient map and the invert adjustment layer. So you can see Photoshop gives you a bunch of different options here. There's a black to white. You can do red to green. You can have multiple different steps in your gradient map. Now, you could make new gradients here if you wanted to. Gradients are kind of their own animal. And I can't say that I've ever found a need to map an actual photo using a gradient map like this, but there it is. So you know how to use it. Have fun with it. I hope this video has been helpful and gives you a basic understanding of how to use these adjustment layers. You'll see that we use adjustment layers in many of our other videos, so you'll get the opportunity to get more hands-on experience using real-world photos. I just wanted to provide you an overview of what they each did, how to use them, and when to use them, and how much to use. It just takes experience in working with different pictures. So check out our other videos for more information about appropriate times to use the adjustment layers. Thanks so much.